Hello and welcome friends, I am Nipunika Shahid, associated with Amity University's Mass Communication Department as Assistant Professor. Earlier I have worked for the media conglomerates like Zee News, ETV News that is currently known as TV18, Sahara Samay and in the news agency ANI. Apart from Amity University, I am also associated with Akashvani as English newsreader. Communication means transferring messages from one to another through any medium. There are various levels in communication like intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication, group communication and mass communication. Mass communication plays the vital role because it reaches very largely to the number of audience. Basically, mass communication has two forms. One is interpersonal communication and another one is media communication. In this chapter, we will focus on different aspects of media and communication like encoding and decoding, barriers to effective communication, normative theory of the press, encoding and decoding. Encoding means the creation of messages which you want to communicate with other person. On the other hand, decoding means listener or audience of encoding message. So, decoding means interpreting the meaning of the message. You will interpret and understand the message, what's just been said. All communication begins with the sender. The first step the sender is faced with involves the encoding process. In order to convey meaning, the sender must begin encoding, which means translating information into a message in the form of symbols that represent ideas or concepts. The decoding of a message is how an audience member is able to understand and interpret the message. Meaning of encoding in communication. Literally, encoding means to convert body of information from one system to another system in the form of codes. Code is the system of symbol, sign or letters used to represent the secret meaning. According to John Fiske, coding consists of both signs and rules that determine that how and in what context these signs are used and how they can be combined to form more complex messages. Coding stands for the full-fledged system of meaning to the members of the culture or subculture. It must be also noted that code and system are interrelated with each other. The effective communication process can be easily understood from the following diagram. In the above process, the encoder or source gives people shape to the message, idea or information, or we can say that he encodes his message in a proper way in his mind and then he sends it to the destination or receiver. Then the receiver interprets the message according to his own mental level and experience. From the above statement, it is clear that without the source, there is no concept of communication. So, it is the most important element. But however, it must be very much simple and clear so that the receiver may easily understand the statement or feelings of the receiver. Meaning of decoding in communication. It has been observed that communication process is continuous. There is no end in it because the one encodes the message and the other decodes the message. A successful decoding is a skill. For example, carefully reading and listening a message for better understanding. Decoding means that the message which source has encoded, then the decoder interprets the message according to his own mentality and experience. So, where the message is simple and clear, the receiver will easily understand the encoded message. So, he will easily and fastly decode his message again to the source. So, the process of communication will intelligible manner, and when it receives to the receiver will easily understand this simple and clear message, and then after using all his fine sense, then the receiver decodes the message to the source. The receiver or destination is technically called decoding. It is quite necessary that the message must be clear, accurate, meaningfully designed in such a manner that listeners, readers and viewers are not mistaken of the meaning and intention. Difference between encoding and decoding. Encoding means the creation of a message which you want to communicate with other person. On the other hand, decoding means listener or audience of encoded message. So, decoding means interpreting the meaning of the message. For example, a breakfast cereal company wants to convey their message to you to buy its product. They will create an ad for the purpose and you will see or hear it on TV, radio or other social media. You will interpret and understand the message, what's just been said. Barriers to effective communication. The process of communication has multiple barriers. The intended communique will often be disturbed and distorted, leading to a condition of misunderstanding and failure of communication. The barriers to effective communication could be of many types like linguistic, psychological, emotional, physical and cultural, etc. We will see all of these types in detail below. Linguistic barriers. The language barrier is one of the main barriers that limit effective communication. Language is the most commonly employed tool of communication. The fact that each major region has its own language is one of the barriers to effective communication. Sometimes, even a thick dialect may render the communication ineffective. As per some estimates, the dialects of every 2 regions change within a few kilometers. Even in the same workplace, different employees will have different linguistic skills. As a result, this would affect the communication channels that span across the organization. Thus, keeping this barrier in mind, different considerations have to be made for different employees. Some of them are very proficient in a certain language and others will be okay with these languages. Psychological barriers. There are various mental and psychological issues that may be barriers to effective communication. Some people have stage fear, speech disorders, phobia, depression, etc. All of these conditions are very difficult to manage sometimes and will most certainly limit the ease of communication. Emotional barriers. The emotional IQ of a person determines the ease and comfort with which they can communicate. A person who is emotionally mature will be able to communicate effectively. On the other hand, people who let their emotions take over will face certain difficulties. A perfect mixture of emotions and facts is necessary for effective communication. Emotions like anger, frustration, humor can blur the decision-making capacities of a person and thus limit the effectiveness of their communication. Physical barriers to communication. They are the most obvious barriers to effective communication. These barriers are most easily removable in principle at least. They include barriers like noise, closed doors, faulty equipment used for communication, closed cabins, etc. Sometimes, in a large office, the physical separation between various employees combined with faulty equipment may result in severe barriers to effective communication. Cultural barriers of communication. As the world is getting more and more globalized, any large office may have people from several parts of the world. Different cultures have a different meaning for several basic values of society. Dressing, religion, food, drinks, pets and the general behavior will change drastically from one culture to another. Hence, it is a must that we must take these different cultures into account while communication. This is what we call being culturally appropriate. In many multinational companies, special courses are offered at the orientation stages that let people know about other cultures and how to be courteous and tolerant of others. Organizational structure barriers. As we saw, there are many methods of communication at an organizational level. Each of these methods has its own problems and constraints that may become barriers to effective communication. Most of these barriers arise because of misinformation or lack of appropriate transparency available to the employees. Attitude barriers. Certain people like to be left alone. They are the introverts or just people who are not very social. Others like to be social or sometimes extra clingy. Both these cases could become a barrier to communication. Some people have attitude issues like huge ego and inconsiderate behaviors. These employees can cause severe strains in the communication channels that they are present in. Certain personality traits like shyness, anger, social anxiety may be removable through courses and proper training. However, problems like egocentric behavior and selfishness may not be correctable. Perceptual barriers. Different people perceive the same things differently. This is a fact that we must consider during the communication process. Knowledge of the perception levels of the audience is crucial to effective communication. All the messages or communique must be easy and clear. There shouldn't be any room for a diversified interpretational set. Physiological barriers. Certain disorders or diseases or other limitations could also prevent effective communication between the various channels of an organization. The shrillness of voice, dyslexia, etc. is some examples of physiological barriers to effective communication. However, these are not crucial because they can easily be compensated and removed. Technological barriers and socio-religious barriers. Other barriers include the technological barriers. The technology is developing fast and as a result it becomes difficult to keep up with the newest developments. Hence, sometimes the technological advance may become a barrier. In addition to this, the cost of technology is sometimes very high. Most of the organizations will not be able to afford a decent tech for the purpose of communication. Hence, this becomes a very crucial barrier. Other barriers are socio-religious barriers. In a patriarchal society, a woman or a transgender may face many difficulties and barriers while communicating. Solved examples on barriers of communication. What do you mean by a barrier to communication? List all the important barriers to effective communication. The answer to this is any parameter that limits the purpose or channel of communication between the transmitter and the receiver is a barrier to communication. A communication barrier may limit or reduce the ease at which we communicate and hence the name barrier. Although the barriers to effective communication may be different for different situations, the following are some of the main barriers: linguistic barriers, psychological barriers, emotional barriers, physical barriers, cultural barriers, organizational structure barriers, attitude barriers, perceptual barriers, physiological barriers, technological barriers, socio-religious barriers. 5 major forms of communication. Intrapersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication is a communication that happens within you. Here, both sender, source and receiver is only one. So, the feedback works without any interruption. Example, a person can communicate to himself through pain, thinking, feelings and emotions, etc. Dynamic communication. In dynamic communication, two persons are involved in this communication process. Hence, the source becomes a receiver and receiver becomes source because of dynamic communication process where the feedbacks are shared between source and the receiver. Small group communication. More than 2 members involved in communication process will become a group communication. If least number of persons is involved in the group communication is called as small group communication. In this communication process, everyone becomes a source as well as receiver through sharing information and giving feedback to another. Public communication. In public communication, source or messages from a single person will reach or received by huge number of audience. But in this communication, there is no mutual feedback between source and receiver like in small group communication, and it's only focused on the speaker. Mass communication. In mass communication, basically it is a large number of audience and they are all that cannot be grouped together in one place. So, we need certain tools or technology for this communication process. But in mass communication, there is no direct access with the receiver. So, for that they need media like newspaper, radio, television, internet. Here the audience feedback is very less or delayed. Levels of communication. Let's understand the levels of communication to make our interactions more fruitful. Verbal level of communication. Among the 5 different levels of communication, this is perhaps the most obvious. We spend a lifetime trying to master the verbal level of communication skills. Nothing beats the effect of hearing the right words at the right time. Different words mean different things to each person. They can bring back memories, allude to associations and conjure up images. But how do you choose the right words? How can you make communication more effective? One foolproof way is by being a good listener. Harappa's education's Listening Actively course focuses on developing better listening skills using various tools like the ear of listening and the harp of framework. Empathy, authenticity and respect are the 3 qualities in the ear of listening framework. Without them, you cannot become an active and engaged listener. Physical level of communication. The Indian film industry might be a behemoth now, but do you know which is considered to be the first film to come out of it? Dada Saheb Phalke's Raja Harishchandra, released in 1930, was a silent movie. Therefore, the audience would have to engage with it by connecting with the expressions and body language of the on-screen actors. The physical level of communication involves eye contact, gestures, postures and facial expressions. These visual cues are a tool to persuade your listeners and make them interested in what you have to say. But how can we practice the physical level of communication in day-to-day life? Well, you can mindfully practice matching and mirroring people's gestures and postures. This will ensure you are mindful of your stance and movement. Auditory level of communication. Auditory communication is focused on the tone, volume and speed of speech and sound. For instance, in addition to the content, the tone and pace of your conversation can have a conscious or subconscious impact on your listeners. If you tend to talk fast, you need to be mindful of slowing down when speaking to introverts or thoughtful individuals. If you don't, you may risk being unheard, even though it may look like the other person is listening to what you are saying. Emotional level of communication. Your emotional state affects the way you communicate. Often, when we are angry or disturbed, we say things we don't mean. Communication is affected by both the speaker's and the listener's emotional state. You may have noticed that we like to surround ourselves with positive and life-affirming individuals. Therefore, be conscious of your emotional state when you communicate. Try to release negative emotions such as anger and pride before communicating with someone. Energetic level of communication. Practicing mindfulness and being aware of the other person's thoughts and feelings will make you communicate more effectively. Of the 5, this is the highest level of communication and quite challenging to master. It comes more naturally to those who are compassionate and empathetic towards others. To try and develop this level of communication actively, think about the well-being of the person you are communicating with and consciously avoid any one-upping. Bringing 5 levels of communication together. Your style of verbal communication represents your thoughts and the message you want to convey. Reflect on the physical, auditory, emotional, and energetic levels to analyze how you put your thoughts. Various levels of communication influence each other. For instance, your emotional state impacts your body language. Be aware of your gestures and postures, the words you choose, the tone and the cadence of your conversation. Understanding what the levels of communication are. Join the Speaking Effectively course at Harappa Education and work on improving various levels of communication. Explore blogs on topics such as the communication cycle, the elements of communication, the 7 C's of communication, grapevine communication and the types of communication channels in our Harappa Diaries section and learn how to deliver information effectively. Normative theory. 4 theories of the press. Normative theories were first proposed by Fred Siebert, Theodore Peterson and Wilbur Schramm in their book called 4 Theories of the Press. At first, the word normative theory was pronounced in USA during the height of Cold War with communism and Soviet. Often it called as Western theories of mass media. A normative theory describes an ideal way for a media system to be controlled and operated by the government, authority, leader and public. These theories are basically different from other communication theories because normative theories of press are not providing any scientific explanation or prediction. At the same time, these 4 theories of the press came from many sources rather than a single source. Sometimes, media practitioners, social critics and academicians also involved developing these normative theories. Normative theories are more focused in relationship between press and the government than press and the audience. These theories are more concerned about the ownership of the media and who controls the press or media in the country. The 4 theories of press and media. Authoritarian theory. Authoritarian theory describes that all forms of communications are under the control of the government elite or authorities or influential bureaucrats. Authoritarians are necessary to control the media to protect and prevent the people from the national threats through any form of communication, information or news. The press is an instrument to enhance the ruler's power in the country rather than any threats. The authorities have all rights to permit any media and control it by providing license to the media and make certain censorship. If any media violates the government policies against license, then the authority has all right to cancel the license and revoke it. The government has all right to restrict any sensitive issues from press to maintain peace and security in the nation. Libertarian theory. The libertarian theory is one of the normative theories of press. The theory, which is originally coming from the libertarian thoughts from 16th century in the Europe. The libertarian theorists are against the authoritarian thoughts. International trade and urbanization undermine the power of a rural aristocracy, which leads various social movements raised includes the Protestants' Reformation that demand individuals' freedom and their own lives and free thoughts. Liberalism means information is knowledge and knowledge is power. libertarianism is free from any authority or any control or censorship. The libertarianism is an idea of individualism and limited government that is not harmful to another. Social responsibility theory. Social responsibility theory allows free press without any censorship, but at the same time, the content of the press should be discussed in public panel and media should accept any obligation from public interference or professional self-regulations or both. The theory lies between both authoritarian theory and libertarian theory because it gives total media freedom in one hand, but the external controls on the other hand. Here, the press ownership is private. The social responsibility theory moves beyond the simple objective of reporting, facts reporting, to interpretative reporting, that is investigative reporting. The total news is complete facts and truthfulness, but the Commission of the Freedom Press stated that no longer giving facts truthfully rather than giving a necessary analyzed or interpretative report on facts with clear explanations. The theory helped in creating professionalism in media by setting up a high level of accuracy, truth and information. The Commission of Press Council also included some tasks based on social responsibility of media, which are as follows: formulate the code of conduct for the press, improve the standards of journalism, safeguarding the interests of journalism and journalists, criticizing and making some penalty for violating the code of conduct. Soviet media theory. Soviet media theory is initiative of Leninist principles which were based on the Karl Marx and Engels ideology. The government undertakes or controls the total media and communication to serve working classes and their interests. Theory says the state have absolute power to control any media for the benefits of the people. They put end to the private ownership of the press and other media. The government media provide positive thoughts to create a strong socialized society as well as providing information, education, entertainment, motivation and mobilization. The theory describes the whole purpose of the mass media is to educate the greater masses of working class or workers. Here the public was encouraged to give feedback which would be able to create interests towards the media. Now we hope that you should be able to understand the contents of the session clearly, and after completing this chapter you should be able to know about the various aspects of communication, including the encoding and decoding, barriers to effective communication, normative theory of the press. That's all for today. Thanks and goodbye.